You already carry pieces of the biological machinery needed for hibernation. Your body can lower its energy use, conserve heat, burn stored fuel, and even generate heat without shivering. But if you tried to spend an entire winter unconscious like a bear, those pieces would not simply click together. Something would go dangerously wrong. So the real question isn't whether humans can sleep for months. It's whether your body could survive being turned down that far, for that long, and then safely switched back on. To understand that, imagine your body as a city with a massive power grid. Right now, thousands of systems are running at once. Your brain is firing, your heart is pumping, your kidneys are filtering, your muscles are maintaining tension, your cells are repairing themselves. Even when you are asleep, the city never shuts down. Hibernation is different. A true hibernator doesn't simply close its eyes. It performs something much more extraordinary. It deliberately reduces demand across the entire biological grid. And that brings us to mechanism 1, the master switch. When winter approaches, many hibernating mammals enter states of torpor, periods when metabolism falls dramatically and body temperature can decrease. Heart rate slows, breathing slows, movement nearly disappears. The animal is not merely sleeping more deeply, its physiology has entered a different operating state. Think of a normal night of sleep as turning off the lights in a few buildings. Torpor is closer to putting most of the city onto emergency power. That's an important distinction because humans already know how to sleep. Sleep changes brain activity, hormone patterns, muscle tone, and energy use. But your body still defends a relatively narrow internal temperature range. Your cardiovascular and respiratory systems keep working continuously. Your biological grid remains very much online. A hibernator can go much further. Its nervous system coordinates a controlled reduction in energy demand instead of simply allowing the body to fail from cold. That's the first major obstacle to human hibernation. Cooling you down is not enough. If you walk outside into extreme cold, your body does almost the opposite of what a hibernator is trying to accomplish. Blood vessels near your skin constrict to conserve heat. Your muscles can begin shivering. Heat production increases because your nervous system is fighting to defend your core temperature. Your power grid sees a crisis and starts burning more fuel. A hibernating animal has biological programs that can change how that grid is managed. Researchers studying torpor are trying to understand the neural circuits that participate in those changes because the state appears to be actively regulated rather than simply caused by an animal becoming cold. That difference changes everything. You cannot create true hibernation by putting a person into a freezer. You would be fighting human thermoregulation, not activating a hidden winter mode. Mechanism 2, the thermostat. Your brain continuously monitors the internal conditions needed to keep you alive. Temperature is one of them. When your temperature begins moving outside the range your body expects, defensive responses appear. This is useful almost every day of your life. But for hibernation, that defensive thermostat becomes a problem. Imagine the power grid operator receiving an order to reduce the entire city's electricity demand by 80% while another control room keeps shouting, "Emergency! Restore full power immediately." That system would fight itself. Natural hibernators solve this in ways humans do not yet fully understand. Their physiology coordinates metabolism, temperature regulation, cardiovascular function, breathing, and behavior as part of the torpor state. And that coordination matters more than any single number on a thermometer. This is why the phrase suspended animation can be misleading. Hibernation is not simply stopping biology, it is biology continuing under a radically different operating plan. Your cells still need energy, your brain still needs protection, your organs still need blood. The city becomes quiet, but it cannot become dead. Mechanism 3, the fuel problem. If you are going to reduce activity for days, weeks, or months, the body needs a reliable energy reserve. Fat is extremely useful for this. Many hibernating mammals accumulate substantial energy reserves before the hibernation season. During prolonged periods without normal feeding, stored fuel helps support metabolism. Humans also store large amounts of chemical energy in body fat, so at first glance, this part seems promising. You already own the battery. But owning a battery and running an entire city from that battery are two different problems. Your metabolism has to decide which fuels are used, how quickly they are released, which tissues receive them, and how essential functions are protected as overall demand falls. That requires coordination. And here is the myth bust. Hibernation is not simply an extreme fast. Going without food can alter human fuel use, but fasting does not automatically produce the integrated torpor physiology seen in natural hibernators. Hunger alone does not give you the ability to safely suppress your temperature, circulation, breathing, and movement for months. The battery is only one component. You still need the operating system. Mechanism 4. The circulation paradox. Now imagine most of our city has gone quiet. Traffic collapses. Factories slow. Streets become almost empty. That sounds efficient. But biological circulation creates a dangerous paradox. When you barely move for long periods, blood flow conditions change. In ordinary human life, prolonged immobility can be a concern because movement helps support healthy circulation, especially in the legs. A hibernating mammal may remain extraordinarily inactive while its cardiovascular system is also operating at a reduced level. Yet natural hibernators have physiological adaptations that allow them to tolerate conditions that would be challenging for humans. Researchers studying hibernation and hemostasis are particularly interested in how these animals regulate clotting during torpor and then restore normal hemostatic function when they become active again. Think about what the power grid has to accomplish. You need enough circulation to preserve tissues. You need a clotting system capable of stopping bleeding, but you do not want unnecessary clots forming while blood flow and movement are reduced. Then, when the animal wakes and normal activity returns, those systems have to transition again. That is not sleep. That's systems engineering. And if humans ever develop a safe synthetic torpor state, solving circulation and clotting would be part of the challenge. Mechanism 5. The muscle problem. Suppose you stayed in bed almost completely motionless for an extremely long period. Your body normally responds to reduced mechanical demand. Muscle and physical function can decline when tissues are not being regularly loaded and used. That creates another hibernation mystery. Some natural hibernators tolerate prolonged periods of extreme inactivity far better than you might expect from simply comparing them with a bedridden human. Their biology is adapted to the lifestyle. Yours isn't. This exposes one of the biggest misconceptions about human hibernation. People often imagine the difficult part is getting you unconscious and keeping you cold. But those may not be the hardest parts. The harder problem is protecting everything while you are inactive. Muscle, circulation, metabolism, temperature control, organ function. Then you have to bring all of those systems back toward normal operation without causing a catastrophic transition. Putting the city onto emergency power is impressive. Restarting the city may be even harder. Mechanism 6. The biological furnace. Here is where humans possess one particularly interesting piece of the puzzle. Brown adipose tissue, usually called brown fat, is specialized for producing heat. Unlike ordinary muscle shivering, brown fat can generate heat through non-shivering thermogenesis. Humans have brown adipose tissue too. That doesn't make you a hibernator. But it reveals something important. The human body contains biological hardware capable of controlling heat production through mechanisms beyond simply shaking your muscles. In small hibernating mammals, brown adipose tissue can play an important role during rewarming from torpor. Imagine our darkened city at the end of winter. You cannot simply flip every circuit breaker simultaneously and hope for the best. You need power stations capable of bringing critical regions online in a coordinated sequence. Brown fat acts something like a biological furnace. It can generate heat as the animal moves away from the low-temperature torpid state, and that leads to one of the least appreciated parts of hibernation. Waking up is expensive. The animal has spent enormous effort reducing energy demand. Now it must raise body temperature and restore normal physiological activity. The grid has to surge back. That transition is not a minor detail. It is part of the hibernation strategy itself. For human synthetic torpor, researchers would therefore need to think about both directions. How do you safely go down, and how do you safely come back? Mechanism 7, the brain. Everything we have discussed points toward one organ sitting above the power grid, your brain. Torpor research increasingly focuses on the neural regulation of these states. Animal studies have identified brain pathways associated with controlling aspects of torpor, but the complete biological command system remains an active area of research. That is crucial because it changes the engineering question. Instead of asking, how can we make a human colder, researchers can ask something far more interesting. Can we persuade the body's own control systems to accept a lower energy state? Those are completely different strategies. The first forces the city into darkness from outside. The second convinces the grid operator to deliberately reduce demand. If a future synthetic torpor technology becomes possible, that distinction could be fundamental. But there is a major gap between identifying neural circuits in laboratory animals and safely controlling an equivalent whole-body state in a human. Humans are large mammals. We do not naturally spend winters entering deep hibernation. Our brains, hearts, blood vessels, muscles, and temperature control systems evolved under different constraints. So when you hear that scientists have triggered torpor-like states in experimental animals, do not translate that into human hibernation has been solved. It hasn't. Animal research tells us where some switches might be. It does not mean we know how to operate the entire human grid. Mechanism 8. Why medicine cares. If human hibernation is so difficult, why study it at all? Because reducing metabolic demand could be enormously interesting in situations where the body is under severe stress. Modern medicine already uses controlled temperature management in specific clinical settings, but that should not be confused with true natural hibernation. The distinction matters. Clinical temperature management changes temperature under intensive medical supervision. Natural hibernation is a coordinated biological state involving far more than temperature alone. Synthetic torpor research asks whether some of the protective strategies seen in hibernating animals could eventually be reproduced or induced in species that do not naturally hibernate. That remains a research goal, not an everyday treatment you can request. Still, consider the underlying logic. When a city experiences an emergency and electricity supply becomes limited, the grid operator may intentionally reduce demand to preserve essential infrastructure. Biology faces similar problems. If tissues are threatened by a mismatch between energy demand and available resources, lowering demand in a controlled way could theoretically change how quickly those resources are consumed. That's why researchers are interested. Not because sleeping for 6 months sounds convenient. Because metabolism itself is a control knob, and hibernators demonstrate that mammals can turn that knob much further than human physiology normally does. Mechanism 9. Space. This is where the idea becomes almost science fiction. Imagine a crew traveling enormous distances through space. Every conscious astronaut requires food, water, oxygen management, living space, waste management, exercise, and psychological support. Now imagine reducing metabolic demand for part of that journey. The potential engineering appeal is obvious. A lower demand crew could, in principle, change some requirements for long-duration missions. But the biological obstacles do not disappear because the destination is Mars. They become more serious. Long periods of inactivity are already a challenge in spaceflight because microgravity affects muscle and other body systems. A torpor-like state would therefore need to solve its own physiological problems while operating in an environment that creates additional ones. Then there is radiation, then nutrition, then circulation, then rewarming, then repeated entry and exit. Then the question nobody in science fiction wants to spend screen time on: what happens when something goes wrong while the crew is metabolically suppressed? The power grid analogy becomes literal. If your crew is running in low power mode, the system responsible for keeping them alive must become exceptionally reliable. Human hibernation would not remove complexity. It would move complexity from the astronauts into the biology and machinery supporting them. Mechanism 10. Could evolution have left us a hidden switch? This is perhaps the most fascinating question. Humans are mammals, and torpor exists across multiple mammalian lineages. Humans also retain pieces of physiology that matter to energy conservation and thermoregulation, including brown adipose tissue. So could the circuitry for a deeper low-energy state still exist somewhere inside us? Possibly in pieces. But pieces is the critical word. Think about your smartphone. It contains a battery, temperature sensors, processors, wireless radios, and software capable of changing power consumption. Having those components does not mean any random combination of commands can safely put the phone into a completely new operating mode. The components need coordination. Natural hibernators evolved that coordination. Humans did not evolve the same seasonal strategy. And this is where we have to separate a fascinating scientific possibility from a seductive story. There is currently no safe DIY method for making yourself hibernate. Extreme cold is not hibernation. Extreme fasting is not hibernation. Sedation is not hibernation. Sleeping for unusually long periods is not hibernation. And deliberately trying to suppress your temperature or consciousness outside medical care can be dangerous. The goal of synthetic torpor research is not to discover a clever trick you can perform at home. It is to understand and potentially reproduce an extraordinarily complex physiological state under controlled conditions. So, could humans hibernate? Today, not in the way a natural hibernator can. We cannot simply decide that November has arrived, shut down most of our metabolism, remain safely inactive for months, and wake in spring with the same integrated protections that a hibernating species evolved. But the answer becomes more interesting when you change one word. Could humans someday be placed into an engineered torpor-like state? Science has not closed that door. Researchers are studying how torpor is controlled, how hibernating animals manage metabolism and temperature, how they tolerate unusual circulatory conditions, and how they rewarm. Each discovery reveals another piece of the power grid, but assembling those pieces into a safe human system is a much larger challenge. The final breakthrough, if it ever arrives, probably will not look like a magic sleeping chamber. It will require control. Control of metabolic demand, control of temperature, control of circulation, control of clotting, control of tissue preservation, control of rewarming, and above all, control of the neural signals coordinating the transition between states. That is what hibernation really teaches us. A hibernating animal isn't surviving because its biology has stopped. It survives because its biology remains extraordinarily organized while operating at a radically different level. The city looks dark from the outside. Inside, the essential systems are still being managed. And that may be the most counterintuitive part of all. For humans to someday hibernate, scientists may not need to discover how to shut the human body down. They would need to discover how to keep it alive while almost everything is turned down. So the technology that once sounded like pure science fiction is really a question about one of biology's deepest abilities. How far can a mammalian body reduce its demand without losing control? Natural hibernators already know the answer for their bodies. For ours, we are still learning where the switches are.